Through the Looking-Glass and What Alice Found There by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 1. Looking-Glass House. One thing was absolutely certain. The white kitten had nothing to do with it. The mischief was entirely the black kitten's fault. The old cat, Dinah, had spent the last 15 minutes washing the face of the white kitten, Snowdrop, holding the creature down by its ear, and rubbing its face roughly, wrong way first, to ensure it was tidy. But the black kitten, Kitty, had finished her bath earlier. While Alice sat curled up in the great armchair, half talking and half dozing, Kitty had been having a grand time with Alice's worsted wool. She had rolled it up and down until it was spread across the hearthrug, nothing but knots and tangles, with Kitty chasing her own tail in the center. "Oh, you wicked little thing!" cried Alice, scooping up the kitten and giving it a kiss to make sure it understood it was in disgrace. She looked reproachfully at the old cat. "Really, Dinah ought to have taught you better manners. You ought. You know you ought." Settling back down with Kitty on her knee, Alice began winding the worsted again, though she didn't get on very fast, as she was constantly talking. "Do you know what tomorrow is, Kitty?" Alice asked. She had been watching the boys gather sticks for the bonfire, though the cold and the snow had stopped them. "I was so angry, Kitty, seeing all the mischief you had been doing. I was very nearly opening the window and putting you out into the snow." She held up one finger and began listing the kitten's faults. "Number 1, you squeaked twice while Dinah was washing your face this morning. Number 2, you pulled Snowdrop away just as I had put down her saucer of milk. And number 3, you unwound every bit of the worsted while I wasn't looking." She sighed, looking out as the snow kissed the window panes. "I wonder if the snow loves the trees and fields, that it kisses them so gently, and then it covers them up snug, you know, with a white quilt. Oh, that's very pretty. I do so wish it was true." "Kitty, dear, let's pretend," Alice said, using her favorite phrase. "Let's pretend that you're the Red Queen. If you sat up and folded your arms, you'd look exactly like her." When the kitten refused, Alice held her up to the looking-glass, threatening, "If you're not good directly, I'll put you through into Looking-Glass House. How would you like that?" Alice then began describing the world beyond the glass. It was just the same as their drawing room, but everything went the other way. The books were reversed, so the words went the wrong way. "Oh, Kitty, how nice it would be if we could only get through into Looking-Glass House," Alice whispered, wishing the glass would turn soft like gauze. The glass did begin to melt away, turning into a bright silvery mist. Alice found herself upon the chimney-piece, and in another moment had jumped lightly through the glass and down into the looking-glass room. The first thing she confirmed was that the fire was real, blazing as brightly as the one she had left behind. Then, looking about, she noticed several of the chessmen down on the hearth among the cinders. With a quiet gasp of surprise, she dropped to her hands and knees. "Oh, here are the Red King and the Red Queen," she whispered. "And there are the White King and the White Queen sitting on the edge of the shovel. And here are 2 castles walking arm in arm." Suddenly, a squeaking sound came from the table behind her, and Alice turned just in time to see one of the white pawns roll over and begin kicking. "It is the voice of my child," the White Queen cried out, rushing past the king so violently that she knocked him over among the cinders. "My precious Lily, my imperial kitten." "Imperial fiddlestick," muttered the king, rubbing his nose, for he was now covered in ashes. Alice, anxious to help the overwhelmed queen and the screaming pawn, hastily picked up the White Queen and set her gently on the table. Once she had caught her breath, the queen called out to the king, who was sulkily attempting to struggle up from the floor. "Mind the volcano! Mind you come up the regular way, don't get blown up." Alice watched the White King slowly struggle up from bar to bar on the fender. Seeing his agonizing pace, she decided, "Why, you'll be hours and hours getting to the table at that rate. I'd far better help you, hadn't I?" She picked him up very gently, dusting him before placing him on the table. She said afterward that she had never seen such a face as the king made, finding himself held in the air by an invisible hand and being dusted. He was far too astonished to cry out, but his eyes and mouth grew larger and rounder in horror. "Oh, please don't make such faces, my dear," she cried, forgetting he couldn't hear her. "You make me laugh so that I can hardly hold you. And don't keep your mouth so wide open. All the ashes will get into it. There, now I think you're tidy enough." The king immediately fell flat on his back. When he recovered, he and the queen talked together in a frightened whisper. The king was heard saying, "I assure you, my dear, I turned cold to the very ends of my whiskers." To which the queen replied, "You haven't got any whiskers." The horror of that moment I shall never, never forget. "You will, though," the queen said, "if you don't make a memorandum of it." Alice watched the king take an enormous memorandum book out of his pocket and began writing. A sudden thought struck her, and she took hold of the end of the pencil, which came over his shoulder, and began writing for him. The poor king struggled with the pencil, protesting, "My dear, I really must get a thinner pencil. I can't manage this one a bit. It writes all manner of things that I don't intend." The queen looked over the book and read the unauthorized entry Alice had inserted. "The White Knight is sliding down the poker. He balances very badly. That's not a memorandum of your feelings." Next, Alice noticed a book lying nearby on the table. The words were all reversed, as if written in an unknown language. "Why, it's a looking-glass book, of course," she realized. "And if I hold it up to a glass, the words will all go the right way again." This was the poem that Alice read in the reflection. Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood awhile in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, Callooh, Calais! He chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. "It seems very pretty," Alice said when she had finished it, "but it's rather hard to understand. Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't exactly know what they are. However, somebody killed something. That's clear at any rate." "But oh," thought Alice, suddenly jumping up, "if I don't make haste, I shall have to go back through the looking-glass before I've seen what the rest of the house is like. Let's have a look at the garden first." She ran downstairs, executing a new invention of hers for getting down quickly. She kept the tips of her fingers on the handrail and floated gently down without even touching the stairs with her feet. She then floated through the hall and caught hold of the doorpost, feeling relieved to be walking in the natural way again. She was now ready to explore the new world beyond the house. Chapter 2. The Garden of Live Flowers. Alice took a moment to compose herself, standing in the heart of the beautiful garden at last. She had finally achieved her goal, and now she needed a plan. "I should see the garden far better," she said to herself, "if I could get to the top of that hill." She began walking down a path that led straight toward it. Only after taking a few steps and turning a sharp corner, she realized the path did not lead straight at all. "How curiously it twists," she thought. "It's more like a corkscrew." Every time she tried a new turn, she ended up right back where she had started, standing outside the looking-glass house. "It's no use talking about it," Alice said, pretending the house was arguing with her. "I'm not going in again yet. If I went in, I would have to pass back through the looking-glass, and that would be the end of all my adventures." Resolving to ignore the house, she set out again, determined to keep straight until she reached the hill. This time, all went well, until she came upon a large flower bed. A tiger lily was waving gracefully in the breeze. "Oh, tiger lily," Alice said, addressing it wistfully, "I wish you could talk." "We can talk," replied the tiger lily, its petals vibrating slightly, "when there's anybody worth talking to." Alice was so astonished that she couldn't speak for a full minute. When she finally recovered, she asked softly, "And can all the flowers talk?" "As well as you can," the tiger lily said, "and a great deal louder." The rose next to it chimed in, "It isn't manners for us to begin, you know. I was really wondering when you'd speak. Her face has got some sense in it, though it's not a clever one." Alice, feeling slightly offended, decided to change the subject. "Aren't you sometimes frightened at being planted out here with nobody to take care of you?" "There's the tree in the middle," said the rose. "It says bow wow," cried a daisy. "That's why its branches are called boughs." "Silence, every one of you!" cried the tiger lily, shaking with excitement. "They know I can't get at them." Alice soothed the daisy patch, whispering, "If you don't hold your tongues, I'll pick you." The daisies fell silent, and several pink ones immediately turned white. She complimented the tiger lily to lift its spirits. "How is it you can all talk so nicely? I've been in many gardens before, but none of the flowers could talk." "Put your hand down and feel the ground," the tiger lily instructed. "In most gardens, they make the beds too soft so that the flowers are always asleep." "It's my opinion that you never think at all," the rose remarked severely. Alice quickly asked, "Are there any more people in the garden besides me?" "There's one other flower in the garden that can move about like you," said the rose, "but she's more bushy than you are." "She has the same awkward shape as you," the rose added, "but she's redder and her petals are shorter, I think." "Her petals are done up close, almost like a dahlia, not tumbled about anyhow like yours." Suddenly the larkspur cried out, "She's coming! I hear her footstep, thump, 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 along the gravel walk." Alice looked around and saw the Red Queen. She had grown considerably. When Alice first saw her as a chess piece, she was only 3 inches high, but now she was half a head taller than Alice herself. Alice wanted to go meet her, but the rose advised, "I should advise you to walk the other way." Alice, thinking this was nonsense, walked straight toward the Queen. To her surprise, she instantly lost sight of the Queen and found herself walking back into the front door of the house. Frustrated, she tried the opposite direction, as the rose had advised. It worked beautifully. In a minute, she was face to face with the Red Queen at the very top of the hill. "Where do you come from?" said the Red Queen. "And where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers all the time." Alice explained that she had lost her way. "I don't know what you mean by your way," said the Queen. "All the ways about here belong to me. But why did you come out here at all?" She then instructed Alice to curtsy while you're thinking what to say. It saves time. She explained she only wanted to see the garden and find her way to the top of the hill. "When you say hill," she interrupted, "I could show you hills, in comparison with which you'd call that a valley." "No, I shouldn't," Alice said, surprised into contradicting her. "A hill can't be a valley, you know. That would be nonsense." The Red Queen shook her head. "You may call it nonsense if you like," she said, "but I've heard nonsense, compared with which that would be as sensible as a dictionary." They walked to the summit, where Alice looked out over a curious landscape. Tiny brooks running straight across, dividing the ground into squares by green hedges. "I declare it's marked out just like a large chessboard," Alice exclaimed. "It's a great huge game of chess that's being played, all over the world. Oh, what fun it is! I wouldn't mind being a pawn if only I might join." The Queen smiled. "That's easily managed. You can be the White Queen's pawn, if you like, as Lily's too young to play, and you're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be a queen." At that moment, they began to run. The Queen went so fast that Alice struggled to keep up, gasping for breath, while the Queen kept shouting, "Faster, faster!" The curious thing was, no matter how fast they ran, the trees and surroundings never changed place. "Are we nearly there?" Alice panted out at last. "Nearly there," the Queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" They ran until Alice was completely breathless and dizzy, then they suddenly stopped, and Alice found herself sitting on the ground, propped up against a tree. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was," Alice said in surprise. "Of course it is," the Queen continued. "In our country, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." Alice declined to try that speed, noting she was hot and thirsty. The Queen offered her a dry biscuit. While Alice ate the dry biscuit, the Queen began measuring the ground with a ribbon, sticking little pegs in the earth. At the 2-yard peg, she faced Alice. "A pawn goes 2 squares in its first move, you know, so you'll go very quickly through the 3rd square, by railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time." She continued listing the squares. "The 4th square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty. And the 7th is all forest." She finished, "And in the 8th square, we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun." At the next peg, the Queen gave her final instructions. "Speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are." The Queen walked to the last peg, and exactly as she reached it, she vanished. Alice was left alone, remembering that she was a pawn, and that it was time for her to move. Chapter 3. Looking-Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing Alice did, standing at the edge of the 3rd square, was to make a grand survey of the country she was about to traverse. "It's something very like learning geography," she thought to herself, standing on tiptoe to see a little further. "Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm on the only one, but I don't think it has a name. Principal towns, why... What are those creatures? Are they making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know." Alice watched one of the bustling figures poking its proboscis into a flower, just as if it was a regular bee. But this creature was far from regular. It was an elephant. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next thought. Something like cottages with the roofs taken off and stalks put to them, and what quantities of honey they must make. She checked herself just as she was about to run down the hill. It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away, and what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I shall say, "Oh, I like it well enough. Only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so." "I think I'll go down the other way," she decided. "I do so want to get into the third square." With this excuse, she ran down the hill and jumped easily over the first of the 6 tiny little brooks that divided the squares. "Tickets, please," said the guard, putting his head in at the window. Alice found herself suddenly in a railway carriage, and in a moment everyone was holding out a ticket, tickets so large they seemed to fill the carriage. "Now then, show your ticket, child," the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice. A great chorus of voices erupted together, sounding like a chorus of a song, thought Alice. "Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute." "I'm afraid I haven't got one," Alice said in a frightened tone. "There wasn't a ticket office where I came from." Again the chorus continued. "There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch." "Don't make excuses," said the guard. "You should have bought one from the engine driver." Once more the chorus rang out. "The man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff." Alice wisely thought, "Then there's no use in speaking." Though she was silent, the passengers all thought in chorus, a truly perplexing experience. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. She thought, "I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I shall." All the while the guard continued to stare at her, first through a telescope, then a microscope, and then an opera glass, before declaring, "You're traveling the wrong way," and shutting the window. A gentleman opposite her, dressed in white paper, remarked, "So young a child ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name." A goat sitting nearby added loudly, "She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet." Suddenly a hoarse voice said, "Change engines," and stopped. "It sounds like a horse," Alice thought to herself. Then an extremely small voice, close to her ear, said, "You might make a joke on that. Something about horse and horse, you know." "Don't tease so," Alice pleaded, looking in vain for the source of the voice. If the voice was so anxious for a joke, why didn't it make one itself? The little voice only sighed deeply, ticking her ear. "I know you are a friend, a dear friend, and an old friend, and you won't hurt me, though I am an insect." "What kind of insect?" Alice inquired anxiously, wanting to know if it could sting. Before the voice could reply, a shrill scream came from the engine, and everyone jumped up in alarm. The horse, having drawn its head in from the window, said calmly, "It's only a brook we have to jump over." Alice felt nervous about trains jumping, but found comfort knowing this would take them into the 4th square. In the next moment, she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright, she caught at the nearest thing, which happened to be the goat's beard. The beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and Alice found herself sitting quietly under a tree. The insect she had been talking to, a gnat, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head, fanning her with its large wings. The gnat was in fact about the size of a chicken, thought Alice. Then you don't like all insects, the gnat continued, as if the entire train journey had been a momentary pause. I like them when they can talk, Alice said. None of them ever talk where I come from. The gnat inquired what sort of insects she rejoiced in. Alice explained she was rather afraid of the large kinds, but could tell it their names. Of course, they answer to their names? The gnat asked carelessly. I never knew them to do it, Alice said. What's the use of them having names, the gnat countered, if they won't answer to them? Alice went on to list the creatures she knew, and the gnat in turn began describing the marvelous insects of the looking-glass world. Well, there's the horsefly, Alice began. Halfway up that bush, the gnat said, you'll see a rocking horsefly. It's made entirely of wood and gets about by swinging itself from branch to branch. It lives on sap and sawdust. Alice was fascinated, noting the fly looked bright and sticky, as if freshly painted, and continued her list. And there's the dragonfly. Look on the branch above your head, the gnat said, and there you'll find a snapdragonfly. Its body is made of plum pudding, its wings of holly leaves, and its head is a raisin burning in brandy. This creature lived on frumenty and mince pie, and nested in a Christmas box. And then there's the butterfly, Alice continued. Crawling at your feet, the gnat said, drawing her feet back in alarm, you may observe a bread and butter fly. Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter. Its body is a crust, and its head is a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Weak tea with cream in it, the gnat replied. Alice raised a new difficulty. Supposing it couldn't find any? Then it would die, of course, the gnat replied. But that must happen very often, Alice remarked thoughtfully. It always happens, the gnat replied. The gnat then tried to convince Alice that losing her name would be convenient, arguing that her governess would have to leave off calling her to lessons because there would be no name to call. Alice objected, saying the governess would simply call her Miss. Well, if she said Miss, the gnat countered, and didn't say anything more, of course you'd miss your lessons. That's a joke. I wish you had made it. Alice, finding the joke quite bad and the gnat's resulting deep sigh melancholy, said, You shouldn't make jokes if it makes you so unhappy. Then came another of those small sighs, and the poor gnat seemed to have sighed itself away, vanishing from the twig. Alice, growing chilly, got up and walked on. She soon came to an open field, leading into a wood much darker than the last. She thought, this must be the wood where things have no names. She worried about losing her own name, thinking how difficult it would be if they gave her an ugly one. As she stepped under the cool, shady trees, she was surprised to find she couldn't name what she was under. I mean to get under this, you know, she said, touching the trunk of a tree. I do believe it's got no name. Why, to be sure, it hasn't. She stood thinking, determined to remember who she was. All she could manage was, L. I know it begins with L. Just then, a fawn came wandering by. It looked at Alice with large, gentle eyes and was not at all frightened. What do you call yourself? The fawn asked, in a soft, sweet voice. Nothing, just now, Alice answered, sadly, wishing she knew. Think again, the fawn said. That won't do." Alice couldn't think of anything. "Please, would you tell me what you call yourself?" she asked timidly, thinking it might help. "I'll tell you if you'll move a little farther on," the fawn said. "I can't remember here." So they walked on together, Alice with her arms clasped lovingly around the fawn's soft neck, until they came out into an open field. In the open air the fawn gave a sudden bound, shaking itself free of Alice. "I'm a fawn!" it cried out in delight. "And, dear me, you're a human child!" A look of alarm came into its beautiful brown eyes, and in another moment it darted away at full speed. Alice stood looking after it, vexed at losing her dear little fellow traveler, but comforted by one fact. "However, I know my name now," she said. "Alice, Alice, I won't forget it again." Now, back in the fourth square, she realized she had reached the crossroad she needed. 2 finger posts pointed along the same road, one marked to Tweedledum's house, and the other to the house of Tweedledee. Alice had entered the domain of the troublesome twins. Chapter 4. Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Alice had reached the destination marked by the twin signposts, to Tweedledum's house and to the house of Tweedledee. "I do believe," she said at last, "that they live in the same house. I wonder I never thought of that before." She was determined to ask them the way out of the wood, hoping to reach the 8th square before darkness truly set in. She wandered on, talking to herself as she went, until she turned a sharp corner and came upon 2 short, fat little men so suddenly that she had to start back. They were standing under a tree, each with an arm clasped affectionately around the other's neck. Alice knew which was which in a moment. One had "Dumb" neatly embroidered on his collar, and the other "D." "I suppose they've each got Tweedle around at the back of the collar," she said to herself. They stood so still that Alice nearly forgot they were alive. She was just peering around to confirm the name when a voice came sharply from the one marked "Dumb." "If you think we're waxworks, you ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing, nohow." "Contrariwise," added the one marked D, "if you think we're alive, you ought to speak." "I'm sure I'm very sorry," was all Alice could manage, for a familiar song kept ringing in her head. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a monstrous crow as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. "I know what you're thinking about," said Tweedledum, "but it isn't so, nohow." "Contrariwise," Tweedledee continued, "if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic." "I was thinking," Alice said politely, "which is the best way out of this wood? It's getting so dark. Would you tell me, please?" But the little men only looked at each other and grinned. "You've been wrong," cried Tweedledum. "The first thing in a visit is to say, 'How do you do?' and shake hands." The 2 brothers hugged and then held out their free hands to Alice. Not wanting to hurt either one's feelings by choosing, Alice took hold of both hands at once. The next moment they were dancing rapidly around in a ring. This seemed quite natural, and Alice was not even surprised when she heard music playing faintly. The sound seemed to come from the tree under which they danced, made by the branches rubbing one across the other, like fiddles and fiddlesticks. It certainly was funny, Alice remembered afterwards, to find myself singing "Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush." I don't know when I began it, but somehow I felt as if I'd been singing it a long, long time. After 4 frantic turns, the dancers were puffing, and the music suddenly stopped. "I hope you're not much tired?" Alice asked. "No how, and thank you very much for asking," said Tweedledum. "So much obliged," added Tweedledee. "You like poetry?" "Yes, pretty well. Some poetry," Alice said doubtfully. "Would you tell me which road leads out of the wood?" "What shall I repeat her?" said Tweedledee, ignoring Alice's question. "The Walrus and the Carpenter is the longest," replied Tweedledum, giving his brother an affectionate hug. Tweedledee instantly began. The Walrus and the Carpenter. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily, because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be. The sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If this were only cleared away," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose," the Walrus said, "that they could get it clear?" "I doubt it," said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the Walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the Walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the Walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the Walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The Carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing, but the butter's spread too thick. "I weep for you," the walrus said, "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none. And that was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. "I like the walrus best," said Alice thoughtfully, "because, you see, he was a little sorry for the poor oysters." "He ate more than the carpenter, though," said Tweedledee. "You see, he held his handkerchief in front so that the carpenter couldn't count how many he took, contrariwise." "That was mean," Alice said indignantly. "Then I like the carpenter best, if he didn't eat as many as the walrus." "But he ate as many as he could get," said Tweedledum. This was a puzzler. Alice started again. "Well, they were both very unpleasant characters." And she checked herself in alarm when she heard something nearby that sounded like the puffing of a large steam engine. "Are there any lions or tigers about here?" she asked timidly. "It's only the Red King snoring," said Tweedledee. "Come and look at him," the brothers cried, leading Alice to where the king lay sleeping. He was crumpled up in an untidy heap, snoring loudly, fit to snore his head off, as Tweedledum remarked. "He's dreaming now," said Tweedledee. "And what do you think he's dreaming about?" Alice said, "Nobody can guess that." "Why, about you!" Tweedledee exclaimed, clapping his hands. "And if he left off dreaming about you, where do you suppose you'd be?" "Where I am now, of course," said Alice. "Not you," Tweedledee retorted contemptuously. "You'd be nowhere. Why, you're only a sort of thing in his dream." "If that there king was to wake," added Tweedledum, "you'd go out, bang, just like a candle." "I shouldn't," Alice exclaimed indignantly, even starting to cry. "Besides, if I'm only a sort of thing in his dream, what are you, I should like to know?" "Ditto," said Tweedledum. "Ditto, ditto," cried Tweedledee, shouting so loud that Alice warned him, "Hush, you'll be waking him, I'm afraid, if you make so much noise." Alice realized it was foolish to cry over nonsense. She wiped her tears and looked at the darkening sky. "At any rate, I'd better be getting out of the wood, for really it's coming on very dark. Do you think it's going to rain?" Tweedledum spread a large umbrella over himself and his brother. "No, I don't think it is," he said. "At least, not under here, nohow." "Selfish things," thought Alice, and she was just about to leave when Tweedledum sprang out and seized her by the wrist. "Do you see that?" he choked out, his eyes growing large and yellow as he pointed to a small white thing lying under the tree. "It's only a rattle, only an old rattle, quite old and broken." "It's spoiled, of course," cried Tweedledum, beginning to stamp and tear his hair. "It's new, I tell you. I bought it yesterday. My nice new rattle!" Tweedledee struggled to hide himself entirely inside the umbrella. "Of course you agree to have a battle?" Tweedledum said, in a calmer tone. "I suppose so," Tweedledee sulkily replied. "Only she must help us to dress up, you know." The brothers vanished into the wood and returned immediately with their arms full of bizarre items: bolsters, blankets, hearthrugs, tablecloths, dish covers, and coal scuttles. They began piling these things on, demanding Alice's help with the tying and pinning. She arranged a bolster around Tweedledee's neck to keep his head from being cut off, as he explained. "I'm very brave generally," Tweedledum whispered as Alice tied on his helmet, which looked more like a saucepan. "And I've got a toothache," said Tweedledee. "I'm far worse off than you." "We must have a bit of a fight, but I don't care about going on long," said Tweedledum. "What's the time now?" Tweedledee looked at his watch. 4:30. "Let's fight till 6, and then have dinner," said Tweedledum. "I wish the monstrous crow would come," thought Alice. The air was suddenly dark. "What a thick black cloud that is," Alice said. "And how fast it comes! Why, I do believe it's got wings!" "It's the crow!" Tweedledum cried out in a shrill voice of alarm. And in a moment the two brothers took to their heels and were out of sight, fleeing the massive shadow as it flapped its wings, creating a hurricane in the wood. Alice ran a little way herself, leaving behind the bizarre scene of the forgotten quarrel and the discarded clothes. Chapter 5. Wool and Water. Alice ran a little way into the wood, escaping the massive dark shadow of the crow, which flapped its wings, creating a hurricane. She stopped under a large tree, believing it was far too big to squeeze in and bother her there. Just then, she noticed something being blown across the ground. A shawl. She caught it and looked for the owner. In another moment, the White Queen came running wildly through the wood, arms outstretched as if she were flying. Alice very politely went to meet her. "I'm very glad I happened to be in the way," Alice said, helping the Queen put the shawl back on. The White Queen only looked at her in a helpless, frightened way, whispering something to herself that sounded like bread and butter, bread and butter. Alice realized she would have to manage the conversation herself. "Am I addressing the White Queen?" Alice asked timidly. "Well, yes, if you call that a dressing," the Queen replied. "It isn't my notion of the thing at all." Alice thought it would never do to argue, but noted to herself that the Queen was dreadfully untidy, with every single thing crooked and all over pins. Alice offered to fix the shawl. The Queen thought the shawl was out of temper. Alice gently fixed the shawl and tidied the Queen's hair, which was entangled with a brush. "I'm sure I'll take you with pleasure," the Queen declared. "2 pence a week and jam every other day." Alice laughed. "I don't want you to hire me, and I don't care for jam." "You couldn't have it if you did want it," the Queen said. "The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." Alice objected that the day must come when there was jam today. "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day. Today isn't any other day, you know." "I don't understand you," Alice said. "It's dreadfully confusing." "That's the effect of living backwards," the Queen said kindly. "It always makes one a little giddy at first, but there's one great advantage in it, that one's memory works both ways." Alice remarked that her memory only worked backwards. "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards," the Queen remarked. "What sort of things do you remember best?" Alice asked. "Oh, things that happened the week after next. For instance, now, there's the King's messenger. He's in prison now, being punished, and the trial doesn't even begin till next Wednesday, and of course the crime comes last of all." "Suppose he never commits the crime," Alice said. "That would be all the better, wouldn't it?" the Queen said. Alice felt this could not be denied. "Of course it would be all the better," she said, "but it wouldn't be all the better his being punished." "You're wrong there, at rate," the Queen said. "And you were all the better for it, I know." "Yes, but then I had done the things I was punished for," Alice said. "That makes all the difference." "But if you hadn't done them," the Queen squeaked, "that would have been better still, better and better and better." Alice was just beginning to say that there must be a mistake when the Queen began screaming loudly. "Oh, oh, oh!" shouted the Queen, shaking her hand about. "What is the matter?" Alice asked, holding her hands over her ears because the screams were exactly like the whistle of a steam engine. "I haven't pricked it yet," the Queen groaned, "but I soon shall. Oh!" She explained she expected to prick it when she fastened her shawl again, as the brooch was about to come undone. Alice caught at the brooch, but it was too late, and the pin had slipped. "That accounts for the bleeding, you see," the Queen said, with a smile. "Now you understand the way things happen here." "But why don't you scream now?" Alice asked. "Why, I've done all the screaming already," the Queen replied. "What would be the good of having it all over again?" By this time it was growing light, and Alice realized the crow must have flown away. The Queen began to fret because she couldn't stop Alice from crying. "Consider what a great girl you are. Consider what a long way you have come today. Consider what o'clock it is. Consider anything, only don't cry." Alice laughed. "Can you keep from crying by considering things?" "That's the way it's done," the Queen said. "Nobody can do two things at once, you know." The Queen then boasted she was 101 5 months and a day. "I can't believe that," Alice said. "I dare say you haven't had much practice," the Queen said. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Just as she finished, the brooch came undone again, and a sudden gust of wind blew the Queen's shawl across a little brook. The Queen went flying after it. Alice crossed the brook after her, and just as she did, the Queen's voice ended in a long bleat, so like a sheep that Alice quite started. The Queen seemed to have suddenly wrapped herself up in wool. Alice rubbed her eyes and found herself in a little dark shop, leaning with her elbows on the counter. Opposite her was an old sheep sitting in an armchair knitting, looking at her through a great pair of spectacles. "What is it you want to buy?" the sheep said, looking up from her knitting. "I don't quite know yet. I should like to look all around me first, if I might." "You may look in front of you and on both sides if you like, but you can't look all around you unless you've got eyes at the back of your head." Alice observed that the shop was full of curious things, but whenever she looked hard at a shelf, it was instantly empty. "Things flow about here," she complained. The sheep, taking up another pair of knitting needles, asked, "Can you row?" "Yes, a little, but not on land, and not with needles." Alice began when suddenly the needles turned into oars in her hands, and she found they were in a little boat gliding along between high river banks. The sheep kept crying, "Feather!" as Alice rowed. "You'll be catching a crab directly," the sheep warned. "Where are the crabs?" Alice asked, hoping to catch a small one to take home. "In the water, of course," the sheep said, sticking needles in her hair. Alice confessed she was not a bird, to which the sheep replied, "You are. You're a little goose." They drifted among rushes, which Alice was delighted to pick. She plunged her arms deep into the water, wishing she could reach the prettiest ones. Just then the blade of one of the oars got fast in the water, and the handle caught Alice under the chin. She was swept off the seat and down into the rushes, giving a series of little shrieks. When she was safely back in her place, the sheep remarked, "That was a nice crab you caught." In the next moment, the oars, the boat, and the river vanished, and Alice was back in the little dark shop, and the sheep was asking, "Now, what do you want to buy?" "I should like to buy an egg, please," Alice said timidly. "5 pence farthing 1, 2 pence for 2. Alice, thinking they might not be nice, chose 1. The sheep took the money and put it away, then said, "I never put things into people's hands. That would never do. You must get it for yourself." The sheep set the egg upright on a shelf at the far end of the shop. Alice began to walk toward it, watching as everything around her turned into a tree, and a little brook appeared. She wondered if the egg would turn into a tree too. Chapter 6. Humpty Dumpty. Alice had paid for her single egg, watched the sheep set it upright on a far-off shelf, and began to grope her way through the strange market that constantly shifted into a forest. As she came within a few yards of the shelf, she saw that the egg only got larger and more human in appearance. Soon she saw clearly that it had eyes, a nose, and a mouth, until she knew with complete certainty that it could be nobody else. It was Humpty Dumpty himself. He was enormous, and his face was so vast that his name could have been written on it 100 times. He was sitting with his legs crossed, like a Turk, on the top of a high, narrow wall. Alice wondered how he could possibly keep his balance. "And how exactly like an egg he is," Alice said aloud, standing close by with her hands ready to catch him, for she expected him to fall at any moment. After a long silence, Humpty Dumpty spoke, his gaze fixed steadily in the opposite direction. "It's very provoking," he said, "to be called an egg. Very—" "I said you looked like an egg, sir," Alice gently explained, trying to make her remark sound like a compliment. "Some people," said Humpty Dumpty, still looking away, "have no more sense than a baby." Alice stood quietly and repeated the famous rhyme softly to herself. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty in his place again. "That last line is much too long for the poetry," she added, forgetting he would hear her. "Don't stand there chattering to yourself like that," Humpty Dumpty snapped, looking at her for the first time. "But tell me your name and your business." "My name is Alice, but—" "It's a stupid enough name," he interrupted impatiently. "What does it mean?" "Of course it must," Humpty Dumpty said with a short laugh. "My name means the shape I am, and a good handsome shape it is, too. With a name like yours, you might be any shape, almost." Alice asked, "Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground? That wall is so very narrow." "What tremendously easy riddles you ask," he growled. "Of course I don't think so. Why, if ever I did fall off, which there's no chance of, but if I did fall," he went on, "the king has promised me with his very own mouth to send all his horses and all his men—" Alice interrupted unwisely. "Now, I declare that's too bad," Humpty Dumpty cried, breaking into a sudden passion. "You've been listening at doors, or you couldn't have known it." "I haven't, indeed," Alice said gently. "It's in a book." "Ah, well, they may write such things in a book," Humpty Dumpty said in a calmer tone. "Now take a good look at me. I'm one that has spoken to a king, I am, and to show you I'm not proud, you may shake hands with me." He offered Alice his hand, grinning so widely that she watched anxiously as she took it. "Yes, all his horses and all his men," Humpty Dumpty continued, "they'd pick me up in a minute, they would. However, this conversation is going on a little too fast. Let's go back to the last remark but one." Alice apologized, admitting she couldn't quite remember it. "In that case, we start fresh," said Humpty Dumpty, "and it's my turn to choose a subject. How old did you say you were?" 7 years and 6 months, Alice replied. "Wrong!" Humpty Dumpty exclaimed triumphantly. He then suggested that if she had asked him his advice, he would have advised her to leave off at 7, but noted it was too late now. "One can't, perhaps, but 2 can. With proper assistance, you might have left off at 7. Alice abruptly changed the subject. "What a beautiful belt you've got on!" she exclaimed. She quickly corrected herself. "A beautiful cravat, I should have said. No, a belt, I mean. I beg your pardon." "It is a most provoking thing," he growled, "when a person doesn't know a cravat from a belt. It's a cravat, child, and a beautiful one, as you say. It's a present from the White King and Queen. There now. They gave it me," he went on, "for an unbirthday present." He explained that since there are 365 days in a year, and only one is a birthday, there are 364 days when she might get unbirthday presents. "There's glory for you." "I don't know what you mean by glory," Alice confessed. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. "Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you." Alice objected that glory didn't mean that. "When I use a word," Humpty Dumpty said scornfully, "it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." "The question is," Alice countered, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." "The question is," said Humpty Dumpty, "which is to be master, that's all." He concluded, "Impenetrability, that's what I say." Alice asked for the meaning of this imposing word. "Now you talk like a reasonable child," he said, very pleased. "I meant by impenetrability that we've had enough of that subject, and it would just as well if you'd mention what you mean to do next. When I make a word do a lot of work like that, I always pay it extra." He then offered to explain the poem Alice had read in the looking-glass house. "I can explain all the poems that were ever invented, and a good many that haven't been invented just yet." Alice repeated the first verse of Jabberwocky. "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe." Humpty Dumpty interrupted her. "That's enough to begin with," he said. "Brillig means 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the time when you begin broiling things for dinner." "That'll do very well. And slithy?" Alice asked. "Well, slithy means lithe and slimy. Lithe is the same as active. You see, it's like a portmanteau. There are 2 meanings packed up into one word." "I see it now. And what are toves?" "Toves are curious creatures. They're something like badgers, something like lizards, and something like corkscrews. Also, they make their nests under sundials and live on cheese." "And the gyre and to gimble?" Alice asked. "To gyre is to go round and round like a gyroscope. To gimble is to make holes like a gimlet." "And the wabe is the grass plot round a sundial, I suppose?" Alice said. "Of course it is. It's called wabe because it goes a long way before it and a long way behind it." "Exactly so. Well then, mimsy is flimsy and miserable. There's another portmanteau for you. And a borogove is a thin, shabby-looking bird with its feathers sticking out all around, something like a live mop." "And then mome raths and outgrabe?" Alice asked. "A rath is a sort of green pig," he explained. "Mome, I think, is short for from home, meaning that they'd lost their way. And outgrabing is something between bellowing and whistling with a kind of sneeze in the middle." Alice admitted that Tweedledee had repeated an easier poem. "As to poetry, you know," said Humpty Dumpty, stretching out one of his great hands, "I can repeat poetry as well as other folk if it comes to that." "Oh, it needn't come to that," Alice hastily said, hoping to keep him from beginning. "The piece I'm going to repeat," he went on, without noticing her remark, "was written entirely for your amusement." Alice felt that she really ought to listen, so she sat down, sighing inwardly, and said, "Thank you," rather sadly. Humpty Dumpty then began, pausing after the first couplet for a self-correction. "In winter, when the fields are white, I sing this song for your delight. Only I don't sing it," he added, as an explanation. Alice, trying to be helpful, replied, "I see you don't." Humpty Dumpty immediately remarked severely, "If you can see whether I'm singing or not, you've sharper eyes than most." Alice wisely fell silent. He continued with the promise of future clarity. "In spring, when woods are getting green, I'll try and tell you what I mean." Alice, eager to placate him, said, "Thank you very much." "In summer, when the days are long, perhaps you'll understand the song. In autumn, when the leaves are brown, take pen and ink and write it down." Alice, concerned about the length, ventured, "I will if I can remember it so long." Humpty Dumpty immediately snapped, "You needn't go on making remarks like that. They're not sensible, and they put me out." He resumed the narrative, his voice gaining momentum. "I sent to them again to say, it will be better to obey. The fishes answered with a grin, 'Why, what a temper you are in!' I told them once, I told them twice, they would not listen to advice. I took a kettle large and new, fit for the deed I had to do. My heart went hop, my heart went thump, I filled the kettle at the pump. Then someone came to me and said, 'The little fishes are in bed.' I said to him, I said it plain, 'Then you must wake them up again.' I said it very loud and clear, I went and shouted in his ear." Alice thought with a shudder, "I wouldn't have been the messenger for anything." Humpty Dumpty, now shouting almost to a scream, concluded the ballad. "But he was very stiff and proud. He said, 'You needn't shout so loud.' And he was very proud and stiff. He said, 'I'd go and wake them if.' I took a corkscrew from the shelf. I went to wake them up myself. And when I found the door was locked, I pulled and pushed and kicked and knocked. And when I found the door was shut, I tried to turn the handle, but—" The sudden silence was heavy. Alice asked timidly, "Is that all?" "That's all," said Humpty Dumpty. "Goodbye." Alice held out her hand. "Goodbye, till we meet again," she said cheerfully. "I shouldn't know you again if we did meet," Humpty Dumpty replied, in a discontented tone, giving her one finger to shake. "You're so exactly like other people. Now, if you had the two eyes on the same side of the nose, for instance, or the mouth at the top, that would be some help." Since he never opened his eyes or took any further notice, she quietly walked away, sighing to herself about the unsatisfactory people I ever met. She never finished the sentence, because at that moment a heavy crash shook the forest from end to end. Chapter 7. The Lion and the Unicorn. The heavy crash that had shaken the forest from end to end, the sound of Humpty Dumpty's inevitable fall, was instantly followed by the thunder of running feet. Soldiers came pouring through the wood, at first in 2s and 3s, then 10 or 20 together, until they seemed to fill the whole forest. Alice, terrified of being run over, quickly darted behind a large tree and watched them go by. She observed that she had never seen soldiers so uncertain on their feet. They were constantly tripping over unseen roots, and whenever one went down, several more always fell over him, covering the ground with little heaps of tumbling men. The horses, having 4 feet, managed better, but even they stumbled, and it seemed to be a rule that whenever a horse stumbled, the rider fell off instantly. Grateful to escape the worsening confusion, Alice hurried into an open place where she found the White King seated on the ground, busily writing in his memorandum book. "I've sent them all," the king cried in delight upon seeing her. He consulted his book. 4,207, that's the exact number, he said. He explained that he hadn't sent the 2 messengers because they were both gone to the town, and that 2 horses were wanted for the game. "Just look along the road and tell me if you can see either of them," he instructed. "I see nobody on the road," said Alice. "I only wish I had such eyes," the king remarked fretfully, "to be able to see nobody, and at that distance too." Alice looked intently along the road, shading her eyes. "I see somebody now," she exclaimed, "but he's coming very slowly, and what curious attitudes he goes into. The figure skipped and wriggled like an eel, his great hands spread out like fans." "Not at all," the king said. "He's an Anglo-Saxon messenger, and those are Anglo-Saxon attitudes. He only does them when he's happy. His name is Haiga." The king further explained that he needed 2 messengers to fetch and carry, one to fetch and one to carry. The messenger arrived far too much out of breath to speak, capable only of waving his hands about and making fearful faces. "You alarm me," the king said, trembling. "I feel faint. Give me a ham sandwich." Haiga immediately produced a sandwich from a bag around his neck. When the king asked for another, Haiga said, "There's nothing but hay left now." "Hay, then," the king murmured in a faint whisper. After eating, the king felt revived, remarking to Alice, "There's nothing like eating hay when you're faint," which Alice did not venture to deny. The king asked, "Who did you pass on the road?" "Nobody," said the messenger. "Quite right," said the king. "This young lady saw him too, so of course nobody walks slower than you." Haiga sulked, insisting nobody walks much faster than he does. Finally able to speak, Haiga put his mouth to his mouth like a trumpet and shouted at the top of his voice, "They're at it again!" "Who are at it again?" Alice ventured to ask. "Why, the lion and the unicorn, of course." "Fighting for the crown? Yes, to be sure," he said, adding, "and the best of the joke is that it's my crown all the while. Let's run and see them." They immediately trotted off, and Alice repeated the words of the old song to herself as she ran. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all round the town. Some gave them white bread, some gave them brown. Some gave them plum cake and drummed them out of town. "Does the one that wins get the crown?" she panted out. "Dear me, no! What an idea!" said the king. Alice, struggling for breath, asked the king to stop just for a minute. "I'm good enough, only I'm not strong enough. You see, a minute goes by fearfully quick. You might as well try to stop a bandersnatch." They trotted on until they came in sight of a great crowd, in the middle of which the lion and the unicorn were fighting, enveloped in a cloud of dust. They stopped close to Hatta, the second messenger, who was watching with a cup of tea in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. Heiga whispered to Alice that Hatta had only been fed oyster shells in prison and was very hungry and thirsty. Hatta, making a desperate effort, finally spoke in a choking voice. "They're getting on very well. Each of them has been down about 87 times. When the fighters paused, the king called out, 10 minutes allowed for refreshments." The unicorn sauntered by, asking the king, "I had the best of it this time?" The king replied nervously, A little, a little. You shouldn't have run him through with your horn, you know." The unicorn said carelessly, "It didn't hurt him," and then his eye fell upon Alice. He stopped, looking at her with an air of the deepest disgust. "What is this?" he said at last. Heiga eagerly introduced her. "This is a child. We only found it today. It's as large as life and twice as natural." "I always thought they were fabulous monsters," said the unicorn. He then addressed Alice. "Well, now that we have seen each other, if you'll believe in me, I'll believe in you. Is that a bargain?" "Yes, if you like," said Alice. The lion had joined them, looking tired and sleepy, and spoke in a deep, hollow tone that sounded like the tolling of a great bell. He blinked at Alice, asking, "Are you animal, vegetable, or mineral?" "It's a fabulous monster," the unicorn cried out. "Then hand round the plum cake, monster," the lion instructed, telling the king and unicorn to sit down. Heiga pulled a large cake from his bag, and Alice found herself with the great dish on her knees, struggling to cut it with a knife. "It's very provoking," she said. "I've cut several slices already, but they always join on again." "You don't know how to manage looking-glass cakes," the unicorn remarked. "Hand it round first and cut it afterwards." Alice obeyed, and as she carried the dish around, the cake divided itself into 3 pieces. When she returned, the unicorn cried, "This isn't fair! The monster has given the lion twice as much as me." But before Alice could answer him, the drums began. The noise was deafening, the air seemed full of it, and it rang through and through her head till she felt quite deafened. She sprang to her feet and leapt across the little brook in her terror. She caught a final glimpse of the lion and the unicorn, rising with angry looks at the interruption, before she dropped to her knees, vainly trying to shut out the dreadful uproar. She had successfully reached the 8th square, which meant, as the queen had promised, that she was now ready to become a queen. Chapter 8. It's My Own Invention. The great noise of the drums and the subsequent lion and unicorn battle ceased as suddenly as they had begun, plunging the air into a ringing silence. Alice lifted her head in alarm. The field was empty now, save for the great plum cake dish still lying at her feet. "So I wasn't dreaming after all," she said to herself, unless we're all part of the same dream. Only I do hope it's my dream and not the Red King's. I don't like belonging to another person's dream," she went on in a complaining tone. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud shout of, "Ahoy! Ahoy! Check!" A knight dressed in crimson armor came galloping toward her, brandishing a great club. He stopped abruptly, tumbled off his horse, and declared, "You're my prisoner." But immediately another voice cried, "Ahoy! Ahoy! Check!" It was the White Knight. "She's my prisoner, you know," the Red Knight insisted, remounting his horse. "Yes, but then I came and rescued her," the White Knight countered. "Well, we must fight for her, then," said the Red Knight, putting on his horse-head-shaped helmet. The White Knight cautioned, "You will observe the rules of battle, of course." The Red Knight promised he always did, and the two began banging away at each other with such fury that Alice hid behind a tree. She noted the rules required that if a knight hit the other, he was knocked off, and if he missed, he tumbled off himself. They held their clubs just like Punch and Judy. The fight ended when they both fell off, side by side, head first. They shook hands, and the Red Knight galloped off. "It was a glorious victory, wasn't it?" said the White Knight, coming up panting. "I don't want to be anybody's prisoner. I want to be a queen," Alice replied doubtfully. "So you will when you've crossed the next brook," the White Knight assured her. "I'll see you safe to the end of the wood, and then I must go back, you know. That's the end of my move." Alice thanked him and helped him off with his helmet. "Now one can breathe more easily," he said. As they began their peculiar walk, Alice noticed the truly remarkable amount of gear he carried. His tin armor fit badly. She noticed a queer-shaped little deal box fastened across his shoulder upside down, with the lid open. When Alice pointed out that the contents must have fallen out, the knight looked vexed and hung the empty box carefully on a tree. "In hopes some bees may make a nest in it," he explained, despite having a perfectly good beehive already fastened to his saddle. "And the other thing is a mouse trap," he added. Alice noted mice were unlikely to be found on a horse's back. "Not very likely, perhaps," said the knight, "but if they do come, I don't choose to have them running all about, you see. It's as well to be provided for everything. That's the reason the horse has all those anklets round his feet. These," he explained, "were to guard against the bites of sharks, an invention of his own." Seeing the great plum cake dish, he declared, "We'd better take it with us. It'll come in handy if we find any plum cake." Getting the dish into his bag, which was already loaded with bunches of carrots, fire irons, and many other things, took a long time, as the knight was so awkward he fell into the bag himself 2 or 3 times. As they finally set off, the knight worried about the wind, which he claimed was as strong as soup, and suggested Alice fasten her hair more securely. His own solution for keeping hair from falling off was an invention to make hair creep up like a fruit tree on an upright stick, since things never fall upwards, you know. The journey was punctuated by the knight's constant tumbles. Whenever the horse stopped, he fell off in front. Whenever it started, he fell off behind. Alice helped him up for the 5th time and suggested he might not have had much practice in riding. "I've had plenty of practice," the knight insisted very gravely. When he suddenly began boasting, "The great art of riding is to keep your balance properly, like this, you know," he let go of the reins to demonstrate and fell flat on his back, right under the horse's feet. Alice, exasperated, cried, "You ought to have a wooden horse on wheels, that you ought." The knight took great interest, saying he would buy one, or 2, several, if that kind went smoothly. Then he described his invention of a new way of getting over a gate. He put his head on top of it, stand on his head, and then his feet would be high enough to get over, though he admitted it would be a little hard. He soon fell again, headlong into a deep ditch. As Alice dragged him out by the feet, he was still talking about his inventions. He claimed the cleverest thing he ever did was inventing a new pudding during the meat course, which was meant to be made of blotting paper, gunpowder, and sealing wax. At last they reached the end of the wood. The knight looked sadly at Alice, who was preoccupied with thoughts of the strange pudding. "You are sad," the knight said in an anxious tone. "Let me sing you a song to comfort you." Alice asked if it was long. "It's long," he said, "but very, very beautiful." He proceeded to explain the confusing names. The song was called Haddock's Eyes, though the name was really The Aged Man, but the song was called Ways and Means, but the song really was A Sitting on a Gate. He stopped his horse, let the reins fall, and, slowly beating time with one hand, began to sing. Alice recognized the tune as "I give thee all, I can no more." "I'll tell thee everything I can. There's little to relate. I saw an aged man, a-sitting on a gate. 'Who are you, aged man?' I said, 'and how is it you live?' And his answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. He said, 'I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. I sell them unto men,' he said, 'who sail on stormy seas, and that's the way I get my bread, a trifle, if you please.' But I was thinking of a plan to dye one's whiskers green, and always use so large a fan that they could not be seen. So, having no reply to give to what the old man said, I cried, 'Come, tell me how you live,' and thumped him on the head. His accents mild took up the tale. He said, 'I go my ways, and when I find a mountain rill, I set it in a blaze, and thence they make a stuff they call Rowland's Macassar oil. Yet tuppence halfpenny is all they give me for my toil. But I was thinking of a way to feed oneself on batter, and so go on from day to day, getting a little fatter.' I shook him well from side to side, until his face was blue. 'Come, tell me how you live,' I cried, 'and what it is you do.' He said, 'I hunt for Haddock's eyes among the heather bright, and work them into waistcoat buttons in the silent night. And these I do not sell for gold, or coin of silvery shine, but for a copper halfpenny, and that will purchase 9. I sometimes dig for buttered rolls, or set limed twigs for crabs. I sometimes search the grassy knolls for wheels of hansom cabs. And that's the way,' he gave a wink, 'by which I get my wealth, and very gladly will I drink your honour's noble health.' I heard him then, for I had just completed my design to keep the Menai Bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. I thanked him much for telling me the way he got his wealth, but chiefly for his wish that he might drink my noble health. And now, if e'er by chance I put my fingers into glue, or madly squeeze a right-hand foot into a left-hand shoe, or if I drop upon my toe a very heavy weight, I weep, for it reminds me so of that old man I used to know, whose look was mild, whose speech was slow, whose hair was whiter than the snow, whose face was very like a crow, with eyes like cinders all aglow, who seemed distracted with his woe, who rocked his body to and fro, and muttered mumblingly and low, as if his mouth were full of dough, who snorted like a buffalo, that summer evening long ago, sitting on a gate. When the song was done, the knight gathered up the reins. "You've only a few yards to go," he said, "down the hill and over that little brook, and then you'll be a queen. But you'll stay and see me off first?" He asked her to wait and wave her handkerchief when he got to the turn in the road. "I think it'll encourage me, you see." Alice promised to wait, and they shook hands. She watched him ride slowly away, tumbling off and getting on again with practiced ease. She waved her handkerchief until he was out of sight, hoping it encouraged him. "And now for the last brook and to be a queen. How grand it sounds!" Alice cried. A very few steps brought her to the edge. She bounded across, reaching the 8th square at last. She threw herself down to rest on the mossy lawn, reaching up to touch something very heavy, fitted tight all around her head. She lifted it off, looking at the object in dismay, and found it was a golden crown. Chapter 9. Queen Alice. "Well, this is grand," said Alice. She had reached the 8th square, bounded across the final brook, and now sat on a mossy lawn, a golden crown resting on her lap. "I never expected I should be a queen so soon, and I'll tell you what it is, Your Majesty," she scolded herself. "It'll never do for you to be lolling about on the grass like that. Queens have to be dignified, you know." She rose to her feet and took a few tentative steps, moving a bit stiffly at first. The weight of the crown made her nervous. She kept imagining it slipping right off her head. But then she reassured herself. There was no one around to witness her awkwardness. "And if I really am a queen," she murmured as she settled back into her seat, adjusting her posture with careful dignity, "I'll learn how to carry myself properly soon enough." Everything was happening so oddly that she didn't feel a bit surprised when she found the Red Queen and the White Queen sitting close to her, one on each side. Alice timidly began, "Please, would you tell me—" "Speak when you're spoken to," the Red Queen sharply interrupted her. When Alice objected that this would mean nobody would ever speak, the Queen scoffed. "Ridiculous!" The Red Queen immediately changed the subject. "What do you mean by, if you really are a queen? You can't be a queen, you know, till you've passed the proper examination." Alice pleaded. "I only said if," but the queens continued to scold her for lacking meaning and having a nasty, vicious temper. And then there was an uncomfortable silence for a minute or two. The Red Queen broke the silence by turning sharply to the White Queen. "I invite you to Alice's dinner party this afternoon." The White Queen gave a wan little smile. "And I invite you." Alice blinked. "I didn't even know I was having a party, and if I am having one, I think I should be the one inviting the guests." "We offered you the chance," the Red Queen said briskly, "but I suppose you've not had many lessons in manners yet." "Manners aren't taught in lessons," Alice protested. "Lessons teach you to do sums and things like that." "Exactly," the Red Queen said, as if Alice had confirmed her point. "And since you're so certain of your education, we shall see what you know." Before Alice could reply, the two queens straightened in their chairs with sudden comical seriousness, as if someone had announced an examination bell. The White Queen clasped her hands primly. "Let us begin at once." And just like that, the banquet was forgotten, swept aside by the Queen's determination to test her. Alice found herself sitting up straighter, facing them as if they were stern schoolmistresses. The Red Queen opened the lesson with a ridiculous mathematics question, demanding with great authority that Alice explain how one could possibly take 9 from 8. Before Alice could do more than frown, the White Queen cut in with another problem involving a loaf of bread and a knife, insisting the answer was simply bread and butter, of course. It went on from there. Every time Alice tried to answer sensibly, the queens interrupted her with another impossible question. When she began, "You make bread by taking some flour," they pounced again, spiraling off into nonsense about picking flowers, gathering acres of ground, and all manner of illogical interruptions. Alice sighed. This examination, she felt sure, would never make sense no matter how clever she tried to be. After a while, the White Queen laid her head on Alice's shoulder and moaned, "I am so sleepy." Since Alice had no nightcap to share, the Red Queen decided to sing a lullaby herself, leaning her head on Alice's other shoulder. "Hush-a-bye, lady, in Alice's lap, till the feast's ready, we've time for a nap. When the feast's over, we'll go to the ball, Red Queen and White Queen and Alice and all." In another moment, both queens were fast asleep and snoring loudly. And just as suddenly as they fell asleep, both queens vanished, leaving Alice by herself in front of an arched doorway marked Queen Alice. The confusion began immediately. On each side of the arch hung a bell handle, one marked Visitor's Bell and the other Servant's Bell. Alice, feeling quite vexed, mused that there ought to be one marked Queen. Just as she puzzled over this, a long-beaked creature peeked out, declared no admittance till the week after next, and slammed the door shut. Alice knocked and rang in vain for a long time, until a very old frog, dressed in bright yellow and enormous boots, hobbled slowly toward her from under a tree. Alice, frustrated by the delay, demanded to know where the servant was who should answer the door. The frog, speaking in a deep, hoarse whisper, merely looked at the door and asked, "To answer the door? What has it been asking?" Alice impatiently explained, "Nothing. I've been knocking at it." The frog shook his head, muttering, "Shouldn't do that, shouldn't do that. Vexes it, you know." He then gave the door a kick and instructed Alice to let the door alone, promising, "And it'll let you alone, you know." But before Alice could decide what to do next, the door was flung open, and a shrill voice was heard singing a feast song. To the looking-glass world it was Alice that said, "I've a scepter in hand, I've a crown on my head. Let the looking-glass creatures, whatever they be, come and dine with the Red Queen, the White Queen, and me." Hundreds of voices joined in the chorus. "Then fill up the glasses as quick as you can, and sprinkle the table with buttons and bran. Put cats in the coffee and mice in the tea, and welcome Queen Alice with 30 times 3. The moment Alice walked through the arched doorway, a dead silence fell across the great hall, instantly cutting short the 90 times 9 chorus of the welcome song. Alice walked up the long table, glancing nervously along the row of guests, about 50 guests in all, a truly absurd assortment of animals, birds, and even a few flowers. She felt relieved they had come without waiting for an invitation, as she would never have known whom to ask. At the head of the table were 3 chairs. The Red Queen and the White Queen had already taken 2, leaving the empty middle one for Alice. She sat down, keenly aware of the awkward silence, desperately wishing someone would speak. At last, the Red Queen broke the tension, her voice sharp and commanding. "You've missed the soup and fish. Put on the joint." Waiters immediately placed a plump leg of mutton before Alice, and she looked at it anxiously, as she had never had to carve such a joint before. "You look a little shy. Let me introduce you to that leg of mutton," the Red Queen announced with grand ceremony. "Alice, mutton. Mutton, Alice." The mutton actually got up in the dish and made a little bow to Alice, who returned the gesture, unsure whether to be frightened or amused. Alice, recovering quickly, took up the knife and fork. "May I give you a slice?" she asked. "Certainly not," the Red Queen said very decidedly. "It isn't etiquette to cut anyone you've been introduced to." And so the waiters carried the joint off, replacing it with a large plum pudding. "I won't be introduced to the pudding, please," Alice pleaded, rather hastily, worried they might never eat. But the Red Queen merely looked sulky and growled, "Pudding, Alice, Alice, pudding." Before Alice could even return its bow, the waiters whisked the pudding away. Alice was finished waiting. She thought the Red Queen shouldn't be the only one giving orders, so as an experiment in authority, she called out, "Waiter, bring back the pudding." There it was again in a moment, as if by conjuring trick. Alice forced herself to conquer her shyness, cut a slice, and handed it to the Red Queen. The pudding immediately spoke in a thick, suety sort of voice. "What impertinence! I wonder how you'd like it if I were to cut a slice out of you, you creature!" Alice was so startled by the talking dessert that she had nothing to say, sitting there and gasping. "Make a remark," the Red Queen demanded. "It's ridiculous to leave all the conversation to the pudding." Alice, glad for any distraction, began to speak, noting that all eyes fixed upon her the moment she opened her lips. "Do you know, I've had such a quantity of poetry repeated to me today, and it's a very curious thing, I think. Every poem was about fishes in some way. Do you know why they're so fond of fishes all about here?" The Red Queen answered slowly and solemnly, putting her mouth close to Alice's ear. "As to fishes, Her White Majesty knows a lovely riddle, all in poetry, all about fishes. Shall she repeat it?" The White Queen, murmuring softly like the cooing of a pigeon, leaned into Alice's other ear. "Her Red Majesty's very kind to mention it. It would be such a treat. May I?" "Please do," Alice said very politely. The White Queen laughed with delight, stroked Alice's cheek, and began. "First, the fish must be caught. That is easy. A baby, I think, could have caught it. Next, the fish must be bought. That is easy. A penny, I think, would have bought it. Now cook me the fish. That is easy, and will not take more than a minute. Let it lie in a dish. That is easy, because it already is in it. Bring it here. Let me sup. It is easy to set such a dish on the table. Take the dish cover up. Ah, that is so hard that I fear I'm unable. For it holds it like a glue, holds the lid to the dish while it lies in the middle. Which is easiest to do, undish cover the fish or dish cover the riddle?" "Take a minute to think about it, and then guess," the Red Queen commanded. "Meanwhile, we'll drink your health. To Queen Alice's health," she screamed at the very top of her voice. The feast immediately dissolved into spectacular disorder. The 50 assembled guests began drinking Alice's health in the curiousest fashion. Some guests put their glasses upon their heads like extinguishers, drinking whatever liquid trickled down their faces. Others violently upset the decanters, drinking the wine as it ran off the edges of the table. The confusion was magnified when 3 kangaroos scrambled bodily into the dish of roast mutton, eagerly lapping up the gravy, a sight which reminded Alice of pigs in a trough. When the noise subsided, the Red Queen commanded, frowning at Alice, "You ought to return thanks in a neat speech." Alice, frightened but obedient, rose to her feet. "We must support you, you know," the White Queen whispered, even as she and the Red Queen began to push Alice, one on each side. They pushed so hard that Alice thought they were going to squeeze her flat. The queens pushed Alice with such force that they nearly lifted her up into the air. Alice, trying desperately to sound grounded, began, "I rise to return thanks." And as she spoke, she actually did rise several inches, floating away from the floor. In a panic, Alice caught hold of the edge of the table and managed to pull herself down again. "Take care of yourself!" screamed the White Queen, her voice piercing, as she violently seized Alice's hair with both her hands. "Something's going to happen!" In that single frantic moment, all sorts of things happened at once. The room plunged into a state of total animated anarchy. The candles grew towards the ceiling, looking something like a bed of rushes with fireworks at the top. Bottles attached pairs of plates on as wings and forks on as legs and went fluttering about in all directions like demented birds. Alice heard a hoarse laugh and turned to see what had become of the White Queen, but instead there was the leg of mutton sitting in her chair. A voice cried out, "Here I am!" from the soup tureen. Alice turned back just in time to see the White Queen's broad, good-natured face grinning at her over the edge of the tureen before she slipped and disappeared into the hot soup. The chaos was complete. Already several of the terrified guests were lying down in the dishes. The soup ladle was walking up the table towards Alice's chair, beckoning her impatiently to get out of her way. "I can't stand this any longer," Alice cried, her patience exhausted. She seized the tablecloth with both hands, gave one good pull, and plates, dishes, guests, and candles came crashing down together in a heap on the floor. "And as for you," she went on fiercely, turning toward the Red Queen, whom she considered the ultimate cause of all the mischief. But the Red Queen was no longer at her side. She had suddenly dwindled down to the size of a little doll, and was now merrily running around on the table chasing after her own shawl. Alice seized the tiny queen, who was in the very act of jumping over a bottle, yelling, "I'll shake you into a kitten, that I will!" Chapter 10. Shaking. She took the small creature off the table and shook her backwards and forwards with all her might. The Red Queen made no resistance whatever. Only her face grew very small, and her eyes got large and green. And still, as Alice went on shaking her, the Queen kept getting shorter and fatter and softer and rounder, and... Chapter 11. Waking. And it really was a kitten after all. Chapter 12. Which dreamed it? Alice found herself rubbing her eyes in the comfort of her own armchair, back in the quiet drawing room where the journey began. On her knee was the black kitten, Kitty, addressing her with a soft purr. "Your Majesty shouldn't purr so loud," Alice said, rubbing her eyes and addressing the kitten respectfully, yet with some severity. "You woke me out of, such a nice dream, and you've been along with me, Kitty, all through the looking-glass world. Did you know it, dear?" Alice had once remarked that it was a very inconvenient habit of kittens that, whatever you say to them, they always purr, making conversation impossible. On this occasion, Kitty only purred, making it impossible to guess whether she meant yes or no. So Alice hunted among the chessmen on the table until she had found the Red Queen. She then went down on her knees on the hearthrug, putting the black kitten and the queen chess piece to look at each other. "Now, Kitty, confess that was what you turned into," Alice cried, clapping her hands triumphantly. The kitten, however, refused to look at the chess piece, turning away its head and pretending not to see it, though Alice thought it looked a little ashamed, suggesting it must have been the Red Queen. "Sit up a little more stiffly, dear," Alice cried, with a merry laugh, "and curtsy while you're thinking what to purr. It saves time, remember." and she caught the kitten up and gave it one little kiss, just in honor of having been a Red Queen. Alice glanced over her shoulder at the white kitten, Snowdrop, which was still patiently enduring its bath from Dinah. "When will Dinah have finished with your white majesty, I wonder? That must be the reason you were so untidy in my dream. Dinah, do you know that you're scrubbing a white queen? Really, it's most disrespectful of you." She prattled on, settling comfortably into the armchair to watch the kittens. "And what did Dinah turn to, I wonder?" Alice mused. "Tell me, Dinah, did you turn to Humpty Dumpty? I think you did. However, you'd better not mention it to your friends just yet, for I'm not sure. By the way, Kitty, if only you'd been really with me in my dream, there was one thing you would have enjoyed. I had such a quantity of poetry said to me, all about fishes," Alice recalled. "Tomorrow morning you shall have a real treat. All the time you're eating your breakfast, I'll repeat The Walrus and the Carpenter to you. And then you can make believe it's oysters, dear." Then Alice turned to the most serious question of all. "Now, Kitty, let's consider who it was that dreamed it all." She called it a serious question, admonishing Kitty not to go on licking her paw. "You see, Kitty, it must have been either me or the Red King. He was part of my dream, of course, but then I was part of his dream, too. Was it the Red King, Kitty? You were his wife, my dear, so you ought to know." Alice begged the kitten to help settle it, but the provoking creature only began licking its other paw, pretending it hadn't heard the question. And so Alice was left in quiet contemplation, gazing at the looking-glass world she had left behind, wondering still at the nature of her vivid adventure. A boat beneath a sunny sky, lingering onward dreamily in an evening of July. Children three that nestle near, eager eye and willing ear, pleased a simple tale to hear. Long has paled that sunny sky, echoes fade and memories die. Autumn frosts have slain July. Still she haunts me, phantom wise, Alice moving under skies never seen by waking eyes. Children yet the tale to hear, eager eye and willing ear, lovingly shall nestle near. In a wonderland they lie, dreaming as the days go by, dreaming as the summers die, ever drifting down the stream, lingering in the golden gleam. Life, what is it but a dream? The end.